What happens when your diabetic husband expects you to be his personal ambulance? The phone rang at 6:30 in the morning, and I already knew what Vincent would say before I answered. I need you to pick me up from the hospital. His voice carried that entitled expectation I'd grown to hate over our 5 years of marriage. 2 hours earlier, I'd called an ambulance because his blood sugar had dropped so low he'd told me to kill myself, while 7 paramedics held him down. Now he wanted me to drop everything and rescue him again, like I had dozens of times before. No, I said simply, and hung up the phone. At 8 months pregnant, I'd finally reached my breaking point with being Vincent's unpaid medical assistant and emotional punching bag. The guilt trip that followed would be epic, but for the first time in years, I chose my own well-being over his endless cycle of medical emergencies and verbal abuse. Vincent had type 1 diabetes, a serious condition that required careful management and attention to detail. Unfortunately, Vincent approached his health the same way he approached everything else in our marriage, with minimal effort and maximum expectation that I'd clean up whatever mess resulted. He ate poorly, monitored his blood sugar sporadically, and treated his insulin pump like an optional accessory rather than life-saving equipment. The pattern was always the same. He'd ignore his dietary restrictions, skip glucose checks, and wait for his body to shut down before acknowledging there was a problem. Then I'd find him sweaty and incoherent, sometimes barely conscious with blood sugar readings in the 20s that should have killed him. The terror of discovering my husband in a diabetic coma never got easier, but Vincent dismissed my fears with casual indifference. It's what happens when you have diabetes, he'd say with a shrug, like his life-threatening episodes were as inevitable as weather rather than the predictable consequence of his refusal to follow basic medical protocols. He never acknowledged the emotional toll his negligence took on me, never apologized for the nights I lay awake wondering if I'd find him dead in the morning. The verbal abuse during his episodes was perhaps the worst part of our routine. When his blood sugar dropped, Vincent transformed from indifferent husband to vicious attacker, spitting in my face and calling me degrading names while I tried to save his life. It's not really him, I'd tell myself afterward. It's just the low blood sugar talking. But the words still hurt, and the pattern of abuse followed by medical crisis was wearing me down psychologically. We'd had an argument 2 nights earlier about his latest broken insulin pump, another piece of expensive medical equipment he'd managed to damage through careless handling. I'd asked him to sleep on the couch so we could cool off separately, but that meant I couldn't monitor him for overnight episodes. Please eat something substantial before bed, I'd begged, knowing his blood sugar could drop dangerously while I was sleeping. At 4 in the morning, pregnancy bladder woke me for another bathroom trip. Something made me check on Vincent before going back to bed, and I found him unconscious and soaked in sweat on our living room couch. When I tried to wake him, he immediately started screaming at me to kill myself, his voice filled with a venom that cut through the medical emergency like a knife. The ambulance crew knew us by name at this point, a sad testament to how routine these crises had become in our household. 7 paramedics struggled to restrain Vincent's 280-pound frame while he fought their attempts to start an IV, ripping out needles and screaming profanities at everyone trying to help him. The chaos was traumatic enough when I wasn't carrying his unborn child. They finally stabilized his blood sugar and insisted on transporting him for observation, standard protocol after such severe hypoglycemia. For the first time in our marriage, I refused to accompany him to the hospital. I was 8 months pregnant, emotionally exhausted, and tired of playing supporting actress in Vincent's self-destructive medical drama. I can't do this anymore, I told the lead paramedic quietly. Vincent's 6:30 phone call demanding pickup service was met with my first real boundary in years. He had options: calling his parents for money, asking his brother for a ride, using rideshare services, or simply waiting for discharge transportation. Instead, he chose to walk 2 miles home in hospital socks, apparently believing this dramatic gesture would guilt me into resuming my role as his personal chauffeur. "You made me walk home," he accused when he finally arrived, limping theatrically and playing up his martyrdom for maximum emotional impact. His parents joined the guilt campaign immediately, calling to lecture me about spousal duty and unconditional love. "You don't do something like that to someone you love," his mother scolded, apparently forgetting that love shouldn't require accepting verbal abuse and medical negligence. The family narrative painted me as the villain who'd abandoned a sick husband in his moment of need, but they conveniently ignored the pattern of behavior that led to that moment. Vincent's refusal to manage his condition properly, his expectation that I'd always be available for rescue duty, and his complete disregard for how his choices affected our family's well-being and stability. 8 months of pregnancy while managing a husband's self-inflicted medical crises had pushed me beyond my limits. The stress wasn't good for our unborn child, and I was tired of prioritizing Vincent's feelings over our family's actual needs. He could have prevented this entire situation by eating properly or treating his equipment with basic care. Setting boundaries isn't abandonment, it's self-preservation. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's self-destructive choices, even when they try to make you feel guilty about it. Vincent's walk home was a consequence of his own decisions, not a punishment I inflicted. Maybe experiencing some discomfort would motivate him to finally take responsibility for his health.